How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video. So in today's video we'll be looking at another psychology myth. And this one I think many students of all ages will find both helpful and insightful. And that myth is that going with your initial gut hunch on multiple choice questions on a test is usually best, and that changing your answer usually doesn't lead to you getting the right answer. In most college universities, 68 to 100% of students believe this to be the case. And strikingly, only 5 to 7% of liberal arts and science professors actually tell their students that changing an answer will benefit them. In fact, in one study, 63% of professors told their students to not change their answer on a multiple choice test because it would lead to them getting a worse final score. Now, there are some scientifically backed tricks for getting better scores in your multiple choice tests. For example, longer multiple choice answers tend to have a slightly higher chance of being correct than the other shorter answers. Additionally, for multiple choice questions, all of the above options and more precise answers tend to be correct more often than not. Now, the truth is actually the opposite of this. In looking at over 3 million ACT and SAT scores and in up to 60 studies, evidence points to the fact that people who change their answers tend to end up changing them to correct answers. In fact, there's a ratio for this. For every one answer that is changed from correct to incorrect, there are 2 to 3 answers that are changed from incorrect to correct. Now, you might be questioning how they measure this. And the answer is pretty simple. They just look for erasure marks around the answer to see if they erased a fill-in for one bubble and filled in a different one. Now, here's some advice based on the truth. And I'll say this first. If you're not a great test taker with multiple choice test questions, changing your answer usually doesn't yield as good as results than if you're like a B student or an A student. Now, this point is important to remember, and that is when you change your answer, you have to have a good reason for changing it. Now, usually when people are changing their answers, they're usually double checking their test. So if you're double checking your test and you're looking at a question you had reservations about before, you look at the options, obviously eliminate the ones that are wrong, and based on what you know and can remember, you put the answer that you believe logically makes sense. And usually, like I said, 2 to 3 times versus the one time you change it from right to wrong, it's beneficial for you. Now, like I said before, why this myth continues to thrive and dominate academic life is because teachers actually say this themselves. I remember in grade school, I had a teacher that would say this pretty much ad nauseum, is you should always go with your gut instinct. Which is exactly the opposite. You should be going with logic and reasoning when eliminating multiple choice answers. You shouldn't be going off of, oh, I put this first, and just because of that reason alone, I'm going to leave it like that. That's faulty thinking. Additionally, there's this thing called the availability heuristic, which is the idea that we associate examples in our lives with bigger ideas that tend to be dominant in popular culture. So, for example, this myth. If we remember on a test that we changed an answer from, if we changed an answer from right to wrong, we're going to be like, damn, that myth must be right because that happened to me. And it kind of stings when you get an answer wrong, and you remember that better than when you change it from something that was wrong to something right. You don't remember that as much, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way that our minds work. Now, another possible reason that this myth is so pervasive on campuses is that students tend to believe that, tend to overestimate their abilities in multiple choice tests. So they might think that their original answer was correct and thus not change it. So that would basically boil down to our egos, and it's important to kind of set aside, when you're looking at a question, your thinking shouldn't be, I studied for this test for days and days on end, so I'm not going to change my answer because I initially probably thought correctly. That's not the reasoning that you should be using. The reasoning you should be using should be based on context, knowledge you have surrounding the question, and using process of elimination to get rid of answers you know are wrong. So how can you prevent the spread of this myth? Well, the best way to do this is to challenge it openly. I know a lot of my friends who have said this, and oftentimes family or teachers will say this, and if the opportunity is there where you can openly challenge them and say, that's not quite right, take it. Because when you challenge these things and you put it on an open forum like that, more people will be exposed to this idea that this myth is not true. And an easy statistic to remember, to bring up as a starting point, is that for every one answer that you change from right to wrong, there are 2 to 3 that you're changing from wrong to right. Not only that, but you can cite this as a way of concretely combating test anxiety, which is a pretty big problem on most campuses today. And once you start arguing against this myth in that manner, and using reason and logic, and using arguments such as that to combat this myth, the foundation of this myth will begin to crack. And if enough people challenge it openly, the power of this myth will erode. Another good way to combat this myth internally is to highlight this fact to yourself whenever you're taking a test. 60 scientific studies, in addition to looking at over 3 million ACT and SAT results, is a pretty good foundational reason for putting stock in this myth and remembering that when you take a test. So I hope the next time you hear this, either from a friend or from a teacher, you challenge them respectfully and you point out to them that going with your gut, or as some people call it, the instinct fallacy, is almost never correct. And that when it is, it's usually coincidental. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment below. Now YouTube's new update will be hitting in about 6 days, and at that point I will no longer be able to upload video stills to my videos, and I will lose my partnership. So I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel and spread the word about it. But yeah, see you all later. Ciao.